Hey everyone, Harry here with a follow-up report on Matt Gaetz. I know we talked about him at length yesterday, but it is a sufficiently momentous, you could say, horrifying, you could say, or perverse move by Trump and the response of now basically all of official Washington brings that home, and I wanted to detail it just a little. Okay, look, I've tried to emphasize, and there'll be an op-ed on this coming out in the LA Times later today. We're not talking about a judgment call. We're not talking about an extreme conservative. We're not talking about someone who's has good faith concerns about DOJ practice. We're talking about a flamethrower, someone who could only be brought into the DOJ to make trouble, undermine it, and harm the entire function of the department. You know, have you ever been a employee and a boss who you know hates you and your whole function comes in and watches you carefully to make sure you don't make any move, that you completely abandon what your professional practice and guideposts have been? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a DOJ workforce of 100,000 plus that Gaetz is there completely to give the middle finger to and make life potentially impossible for. And this is on top of everything else, completely short-sighted and ignorant. The part of the DOJ that is the only thing Trump and Gaetz, as far as anyone can tell, cares about, the 0.01% of the investigations of the president or other high administration officials. Trump's sole lookout is this, and certainly Gaetz will be there to look out for it. But what about the other 99.9% of the function of justice in this country, the discharge of it without fear or favor? He is there. I will just take the one word of praise, if you want to call it that you can hear in the whole chorus of condemnation from Republicans and Democrats, from DOJ alums and people in the political sphere. Absolute, complete sort of horror and stupefaction at the nomination, except one Trump advisor speaking anonymously who put it this way: if you want to renovate a kitchen, you can either do it with a small hammer or a sledgehammer. Matt Gaetz is the sledgehammer. Matt Gaetz is the sledgehammer. He is, beyond an awful choice, a perverse choice, brought in to really, bring down the foundations, or at least spend all his time trying to bring them down. And the cavalier attitude about it completely overlooks the potential long-lasting consequences. That is one of the major differences between a well-functioning democracy and an autocracy, is that in the autocracy, law is determined by the fiat of the leader, and there's just no way of having confidence that the justice system works, and people become, apathetic and alienated. That's what we're talking about with Gaetz. Let me just amplify a few more things. He's been called by a conservative Republican, John Bolton, the worst nomination in the history of the country. And he's clearly the least qualified attorney general in memory. I went back and just looked at people from all the nominees from all sides. This is a guy who doesn't know the first thing about prosecuting, except that he himself has been prosecuted, and has scant even regular legal experience. His classmates at William and Mary actually took up a petition where 400 of them said he's just not qualified to determine the law or really be a lawyer in anything but name. So just utter incompetence in a fairly breathtaking way. And that's before you get into all the problems. I just want to amplify them a little and why they make for such a hard confirmation battle potentially, and close with a word or two about a recess appointment. So just to remind you, the facts are pretty clear. The department declined to bring a prosecution because of difficulties as they saw it with the main complaining witness, someone who was a minor when Gaetz took her away and gave her drugs and had sex with her. Gaetz is himself the beneficiary of a system of justice that really sometimes leans over backwards to protect defendants' rights. They had the case against him, and he got away by an eyelash. But this is a guy who, it's clear, just in terms of a measure of his character, was, along with his co-conspirator, who's doing 11 years, they just would work off a website, get young women, including, at least in one instance, underage women, and that, in federal law, was the linchpin for what would have been the charges that in fact weren't brought, but get them and take them places and give them lobster dinners and a lot of drugs, including MDMA, and then have basically drug-fueled orgies. Whether or not that checks all the boxes of elements of a crime, this is the Callow Attorney General nominee. And besides that, he's about the most unpopular guy in the House. I've heard him compared with Ted Cruz as the least loved member in the House. He's a jerk. He's the sort of worst caricature of a kind of a frat boy. He's made amazingly misogynistic statements, calling pro-choice protesters fat and ugly. When he was asked, do you think that the women that you're disparaging could be offended? His response was, yeah, let them be offended. This is the guy who would, follow in the footsteps of, well, just for starters, Jeff Sessions and John Ashcroft, very conservative folks who, when they went into the Department of Justice, understood their institutional role. Not to mention Republican Ed Levy, who really inaugurated the current Department of Justice and put it on a footing of public credibility, so important for its function, and Robert Jackson, Merrick Garland, just people who had a lookout for the institutional integrity of the DOJ. So we're talking about the guy who is brought in specifically to use a sledgehammer on the Department of Justice. And just imagine for a moment that he is successful. It looks as if he would have a lot of trouble getting confirmed, which is totally saying something given how the Senate and entire town is bending the knee to Trump. But Trump has a solution here for getting away with it, as he has so much in his 9 years or so on the scene, and that is to appoint him as a recess appointment. Even though there's no real recess, it would just be contrived in order to get Gaetz in, and he would need some cooperation from the Senate to do it. Senate might be willing to do it because the alternative is to have Gaetz come forward and they be humiliated by supporting a guy who Democratic questioning and a background investigation would show is just a horror show, and someone whose best role vis-a-vis the Department of Justice most natural would be outlaw and defendant, not running the entire operation. I just want to close with just reports that I've had anecdotally in the last 24 hours. There have been certain transitions where certain veterans decide maybe it's now time for me to leave. We're talking about the potential for mass exodus and a workforce that kind of to a person thinks that this is done to really undermine and take a sledgehammer to the Department of Justice. Anyone from any party who has any respect for the traditions and important practices of the DOJ is dead set against this. And of course, many will leave, and many of the best people will leave, and then the ones who are left will just, Gaetz will take it as his responsibility to his patron, Donald Trump, to have the boot on the neck and make them, as he put it, come to heel. And what does that mean for a guy who knows nothing about law enforcement, nothing about the DOJ, what it does? I think it's basically to protect Donald Trump, go after his enemies, and as for all the rest, all the daily function that the DOJ does, be at best indifferent, but maybe worse than that, try literally to undermine it. It's a mind-boggling situation and one of the deepest concern for anyone who cares about the operation of justice in this country. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.